Hi everybody, episode 29. I don't know if it's gonna work. Like normally I film from YouTube and right now I'm only just filming from my camera. I don't know what's happening. Hopefully I'll be able to upload the video anyway. Okay, shaping the post-war world. The US abandoned its isolationist traditions after World War II and helped to create structures to a more open world. You have to know that we were isolationist before and after World War I. Not now. This is the Cold War. We are one of the two superpowers. We are not isolationist any longer. United Nations headquarters. On April 25th, 1945. The war's not even over yet. Anywhere. It's not over anywhere yet. The United Nations opened. Its charter resembled that of the defunct League of Nations. So we're basically replacing it. The UN was led by the Security Council of 15 members, with 5 being permanent and having a power to veto. US, Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China. UN troops, they wear light blue helmets. The UN keeps peace and has a humanitarian role in the world. You know that the humanitarian efforts, especially like in Africa and places like that, there are humanitarian efforts. Can you see the top of that? Yeah. Okay, the Cold War. Cold War equals Soviet Union versus United States and our allies. This is basically it. This is basically it right there. Unless Russia is faced with an iron fist and strong language, another war is in the making. Truman. Truman was a very decisive man. It was mostly an ideological struggle. The Cold War was a continuing state of tension and hostility between the Soviet Union and the United States from 1945 through 1991. Don't get that confused with the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall is 1961 to 1989. At the heart of the conflict was a difference in political and economic philosophies of the world's two superpowers. Goal, Soviet Union, spread communism worldwide. Goal, contain communism and the eventual collapse of the communist world. We want them to go away entirely. Here's what we're going to do. Espionage, KGB for them, CIA for us. Arms race, there's a big escalation in creating arms. As you know, in 1949, Soviet Union is going to get the atomic bomb also. And then an ideological competition for the minds and hearts of the third world, the people that are not yet, have not decided what side they would go with. So we're trying to get the third world to become democratic, and he, of course, Stalin, is trying to get it to become communist. Communist government and command economy versus democratic government and capitalist economy. And we're going to have proxy wars in Korea and in Vietnam. So command economy equals communism, and of course capitalism is democratic. And then bipolarization of Europe, NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. We talked about that. NATO is the enforcement mechanism of the United Nations, and the Warsaw Pact is the enforcement mechanism for Soviet Union and all of their satellite states. US and Soviet Union were the only superpowers after World War II, and therefore it seemed like big problems were going to happen. Stalin. The US spent the Cold War trying to stop the spread of communism. Containment, containment, containment. That's the Truman doctrine. It's a bit paranoid, but it completely consumed the United States and our military. The Soviet Union spent the Cold War dealing with a paranoid fear of being attacked, even though it had only happened twice in the last 150 years. First, with Napoleon, who tried to take over in the winter and lost horribly. And then with Hitler, who tried to do the same thing during World War II and lost horribly. Went bad for both of them. The US and Soviet Union had incompatible political and economic systems, which caused worldwide tensions. People trying to decide whether they're going to be communism or capitalist, and all of us fighting to try to sway them to our side. We, of course, are capitalist and a democracy. Soviet Union is communist dictatorship with a command economy, which means that the government decides, Stalin decides what you will make or what you will produce. The seeds of the Cold War were sown when the US supported the White Army against Lenin's Red Army in the Russian Revolution in 1917. For 3 years, we sided with troops against the communists, against the Bolsheviks, So that sows the very first seeds of discontent between us and Soviet Union, because we didn't support them. We didn't support them way back then. The U.S. did not recognize the USSR until 1933. So after 1917, it's another like 16 years before we even acknowledge that they exist. They became World War II allies with us at that time, and only Nazi Germany was our common enemy at that time. After World War II, the U.S. denied the Soviet Union's request for $6 billion of a reconstructive loan. They asked us for money. They were our ally. They asked us for money. We didn't give them any money. Had we given them money, maybe they would have become capitalist. Maybe they'd become democratic. But it seems like it certainly should have been worth a try. We didn't do it. But they did give $3.75 billion to Britain, the other World War II ally. So we give lots of money to Britain, nothing. Nothing to the Soviet Union. I don't know how smart that was. Of course, Winston Churchill, FDR, and Stalin. 1945 at the Yalta Conference, Stalin promised free and fair elections in Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe. He promised there would be free and fair elections, as well as dividing up Germany. Stalin hoped Eastern European countries under Soviet control could act like a buffer against the West. He wanted all of these countries to protect him from a possible land invasion by the Allies. Whoever occupies a territory also imposes his own social system. Everyone imposes his own system as far as his armies can reach. It cannot be otherwise. That's Stalin. And then U.S. and Soviet Union engaged in a Cold War that would last for the next 45 years, from 1946 to 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then for now, the epicenter of the Cold War is East Germany, because of the Yalta Conference. The U.S. knew an economically healthy Germany would speed up the European recovery. So the Marshall Plan for us. The U.S. also knew that economic healthy nations typically oppose communism. So we want to do anything we can to make other nations embrace us and reject communism. The Soviet Union wanted Germany to pay reparations to keep it weak. They wanted a weakened Germany, so they wanted them to pay reparations. And then famously, the Berlin Blockade and Airlift. From June of 48 to May of 49, for 11 months, all the necessities for the city's 2.5 million residents, an estimated 4,500 tons of food, coal, and other materials, because it was so cold, so for heat, coal, had to enter the city by air. On its biggest day, the Easter Parade of April 16, 1949, the Airlift sent 1,398 flights into Berlin, one every minute, and they sent the kids candy. Isn't that sweet? So, the Berlin Airlift, and then remember, at the end of it, in 1949, in May of 1949, they just take away the Soviet trucks that are blocking the entrance. So, importantly, there are 4 different sectors. There were 4 sectors, and so Soviet Union had 1 sector, but Berlin was smack dab in the middle of that sector, and we, since it was the capital, got to have control of West Berlin. So he had tried to cut off access, and instead we flew planes and planes and planes, the Berlin Airlift. And then he just went away. Milk. Lots. The poor East German kids, they probably saw all these planes coming and were like, gosh, can we get some of that candy? They didn't get to. They got toys. They sent them toys and candy. And then dogs. This famous dog would take all of this food to places that they couldn't get to. Germany was divided into 4 occupational zones controlled by U.S., Soviet Union, UK, and France. That was the Yalta Agreement. The U.S. wanted Germany reunited, but since the Soviet Union received no reparations, they refused to relinquish control. So they wouldn't let it be one big Germany, because we didn't give them reparations from Germany. During the 1948 Berlin Airlift, the U.S. overcame the Soviet blockade of Western Berlin by delivering supplies to the city via airplanes for almost a year. Operation Vittles. Operation Vittles. What happens to Berlin happens to Germany. What happens to Germany happens to Europe. That's why we did it. We are convinced that our remaining in Berlin is essential to our prestige in Germany and in Europe. Whether for good or bad, it has become a symbol of the American intent. Are we going to help or not? 277,000 flights, 2.3 million tons of supplies. The airlift was the starting point for Germany's inclusion in the West and for the reconciliation with the Western powers, everybody in the West. And then look, how to be safe in an atom bomb attack. There's not any way. You don't have to hide under the desks. Don't hide under the desks. It doesn't matter. An imaginary line, the Iron Curtain, remember that was from Winston Churchill's speech in Missouri, now separated Soviet-controlled Eastern Europe and the democracies of the West. Here it is, that Iron Curtain. There's not really an Iron Curtain. There's not an Iron Curtain. It's what they called it. From Stettin in the Baltic, this is, of course, Churchill's famous speech. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lies the ancient capitals of Central and Eastern Europe. Over here, all of the capitals. Com-econ, we talked about this, the opposite of our Marshall Plan is called com-econ. And that's what the Soviet Union did to try to support them, the satellite states, monetarily. In 1946, Stalin used his troops to aid communist movements in Iran. Truman protested and the USSR withdrew. We're like, oh no, oh, by the way, there you go. Iran. Nope. The Soviet specialist George F. Kennan, in his long telegram, warned Truman that the Soviet Union would aggressively seek to expand communism, which is why we come up with the Truman Doctrine of containment, to contain communism. It's called the Long Telegram in 1947. The Soviet Union perceived itself as at perpetual war with capitalism. Socialism and social democracy are enemies, not allies. The Soviet Union would use controllable Marxists in the capitalist world as allies. Soviet aggression was fundamentally not aligned with the views of the Russians or with economic reality, but in historic Russian xenophobia, fear of foreigners. You guys, I can't see you very well. Fear of foreigners. But in historic Russian xenophobia and paranoia. And the Soviet government structure prohibited objective or accurate pictures of internal and external reality. We're going to continue for a long time to find the Russians difficult to deal with. 46 years to be exact. Well, actually, and now. With Vladimir Putin. Truman Doctrine. Spread money, spread money, spread money with the Marshall Plan. Try to rebuild all of Europe and then gain favorable opinions of the United States as a result. But contain communism. With patient but firm and vigilant containment, the U.S. could contain Soviet expansion. The virus of communism. Iron Curtain, United Nations trying to lift it, can't be lifted. The Truman Doctrine containing communism through financial and military, both financial and military means, became U.S. policy throughout the Cold War. And thus we're going to have proxy wars in Korea and in Vietnam. Aid to Greece and Turkey, because early on, right after the war, Greece and Turkey are being, the Soviet Union is trying to inspire them to become communist. So we give them money, hoping that that will make them decide not to be communist. Truman requested $400 million to help Greece and Turkey resist communism. Now that I've categorized you all, I can give these amazing people money and support. Communist countries? No. Europe? Yes. So the Truman Doctrine, had they just even given money to these communist countries, they might have come over. They might have come over and been democratic and capitalist. But we don't. We don't even offer that. Critics argued that we even gave money to dictators as long as they were not communist. You can be a dictator, just not communist. But what about when I invaded Japan for you, Stalin? The Marshall Plan was devised by Truman and Secretary of State George C. Marshall. 3 goals: stabilize the currency in Europe, increase agricultural and industrial production all over the world, especially in our world, expand exports. We need to export our goods, make money. Money, money, money. European recovery. The Marshall Plan sent $12.5 billion over 4 to 16 years, cooperating nations to spur our economic growth. And this is it. This is the Marshall Plan. That's the banner that they used. This move is not against any country or doctrine, but against hunger, poverty, despair, and chaos. The Marshall Plan aid led to miraculous recoveries of Western European countries. That's the famous propaganda poster for the Marshall Plan. European Recovery Act or something like that. Under Truman, the U.S. maintained a powerful military in case of war with the Soviet Union, and defense spending soared. Dwight David Eisenhower, after this, is going to tell us that we have to be very, very careful about military expenditures and beware the military-industrial complex. It gets built up very huge under Truman. And Eisenhower is actually a general. National defense budget, and this is how much it changes. 1940, the national defense budget. 44 in the peak of the war. 48 drops off, and then goes up, up, up until we get to Ike. And then Ike in 1952 levels it off. But it just climbs like crazy with Truman. That's the Pentagon, as you know. In 1947, Truman passed the National Security Act, creating the Department of Defense. We have the Department of Defense in 1947, after World War II. Oh, look, let's build a 6-foot deep bomb shelter. That's probably not our grave at all. They were 6 foot deep. That's the same as a grave. The Department of Defense is led by a new cabinet position, the Secretary of Defense, with civilian heads of the Army, Navy, and Air Force housed in the Pentagon. Pentagon, Pentagon. 5 sides. Then National Security Council advises the President on national security matters. And then we made the CIA. The NSA established a Central Intelligence Agency to coordinate the government's foreign fact gathering. That's espionage. That means spying. We created the CIA to spy on our enemies and our friends. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You have to know NATO is North Atlantic Treaty Organization. You have to know what NATO means. It's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The North Atlantic, this is the Atlantic Treaty Organization. All of these countries are part of it. 1949. The US, Britain, France, Belgium, and Luxembourg formed the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And then it changed as time went on. NATO is a mutual defense agreement. The US was no longer avoiding entangling alliances. We created alliances. I'm not going to read that. And then the Warsaw Pact is the opposite. We have NATO, and then they have the Warsaw Pact. 1955. Okay, so 1949 is when we create NATO, and 1955 is when Stalin creates the Warsaw Pact, 6 years later, which is their mutual defense. The USSR created the Warsaw Pact among its satellite nations to counter NATO troops. And then post-war Asia. We'll talk about it later. Okay, bye.